I found a strange woman's wallet in my husband's car 2 months after he died. Inside was a photo of them together, smiling. My heart was racing. I tracked her down and demanded answers. She agreed to meet. What she told me changed everything I knew about him, turns out. The wallet was wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. Black leather, worn soft at the edges, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. I wasn't looking. I was cleaning out the car because the dealership was coming to pick it up in the morning, and I'd put it off for 2 months because every time I opened the driver's side door, I could still smell him. That particular combination of coffee and the sandalwood aftershave he'd used since we were 23. My hand brushed against it while I was fishing out old receipts and a handful of change that had collected in the gap. I pulled it out thinking it was one of those leather pouches he kept his sunglasses in. It wasn't. The snap was brass, tarnished. I opened it without thinking. Driver's license, Illinois. A woman's face. Brown hair, maybe 40, maybe a little older. The name said Rebecca Chen. An address in Oak Park. Credit cards. A punch card for a frozen yogurt place with 7 stamps on it. $14 in cash. And tucked behind a clear plastic sleeve, a photograph. My husband, David. Standing next to her on what looked like a boardwalk somewhere. Ocean behind them. Both of them smiling. His arm around her shoulders. She was leaning into him the way people lean into someone they're comfortable with. The way I used to lean into him. I don't remember sitting down. I just remember being on the garage floor with my back against the rear tire, holding that photograph, and the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and the sound of my own breathing getting strange. There's a thing that happens when you find something like that. Your brain doesn't process it as information. It processes it as impact. Like someone hit you in the chest with something heavy. You can't think. You can't move. You just sit there trying to remember how your lungs work. The photograph wasn't dated. The background could have been anywhere. Lake Michigan, maybe. Or one of those beach towns in Indiana. He used to go fishing sometimes. Weekend trips with his brother. That's what he told me. I sat in that garage for over an hour. The concrete was cold through my jeans. At some point, the automatic light clicked off and I was just sitting there in the dark, holding a dead woman's, no. Holding my dead husband's, no. Holding a stranger's wallet that had been in my husband's car for God knows how long, with a picture of them together, and I couldn't make any of it fit into anything that made sense. I should probably explain who we were. Who he was. What I thought I knew. David and I met in college. One of those random encounters that people always want to believe is fate but is really just proximity and timing. He was in the library the same night I was, same floor, same study room shortage. He offered to share his table. I noticed his hands first. Big hands, square fingers, the kind that looked like they could fix things. He was studying engineering. I was pre-law. We had nothing in common except that we were both tired and both needed somewhere to sit, and by the end of that night, we'd talked for 4 hours and I'd completely forgotten about the paper I was supposed to be writing. We got married 3 years later. Small ceremony. His family, my family, a handful of friends. We moved to Evanston because he got a job with a firm downtown and I passed the bar and took a position at a nonprofit that handled housing discrimination cases. We bought a house that needed too much work and spent the next 15 years slowly making it ours. No kids. We tried for a while, then we stopped trying, then we stopped talking about it. These things happen. They don't have to mean anything. 22 years. That's how long we were married. 22 years of mornings and dinners and arguments about whose turn it was to call the plumber. 22 years of his snoring and my cold feet and the way he always burned the toast but insisted on being the one to make breakfast anyway. 22 years of building something that I thought was solid, real. The kind of marriage that doesn't make for interesting stories because nothing dramatic ever happens. He died in September, aneurysm. He was at work, in a meeting, and then he wasn't. They said he didn't suffer. They always say that. I don't know if it's true or if it's just something people say because the alternative is too terrible to hand to someone who's already drowning. The funeral was on a Thursday. It rained. His brother gave a eulogy that made everyone cry. I stood at the front of the church in a black dress I'd bought 6 years ago for someone else's funeral, and I shook hands and accepted condolences and did all the things you're supposed to do when your life has suddenly become a series of administrative tasks. Death certificates. Bank accounts. Insurance claims. The car. 2 months later, I was cleaning out the car, and I found the wallet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the wallet on the table in front of me, and I looked at the photograph, and I tried to find an explanation that didn't involve what I thought it involved. Maybe she was a client. Maybe she was a colleague's wife. Maybe the picture was old, from before we met. But the lines around his eyes in that photo were the same lines he had when he died. Not the smooth face of the man I married. The older face. The one I'd been waking up next to for the last decade. The address on her license was current. I checked. I'm a lawyer. I know how to find things. Rebecca Chen. 44 years old. Worked as a nurse at Rush University Medical Center. Divorced in 2019. No criminal record. No obvious connection to my husband's company or anyone in our social circle. Just a woman in Oak Park with a frozen yogurt punch card and a picture of my husband in her wallet. I could have called someone. My sister. David's brother. Someone who could have told me what to do, how to feel, whether I was being crazy or whether I had every right to feel like the floor had dropped out from under me. But I didn't. I sat there alone because that's what I'd been doing for 2 months anyway, and at least now I had company. Even if the company was just a stranger's driver's license staring up at me from the kitchen table. 3 days later, I called her. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I expected her not to answer. Maybe I expected her to hang up. What I didn't expect was the silence on the other end of the line when I said my name. That particular kind of silence that tells you the person on the other end knows exactly who you are and is deciding what to do about it. I found your wallet, I said. In David's car. More silence. I think we should talk. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quieter than I'd imagined. Steadier. Yes, she said. I think so too. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. She suggested one in Lincoln Square, which was halfway between us, and I said fine. I didn't care where. I just needed to look at her face and ask her the questions that had been circling in my head for 3 days like vultures. The morning of the meeting, I got dressed 3 times. The first outfit was too casual. The second was too aggressive. The third was just clothes, jeans, a sweater, boots. I wasn't going to impress anyone. I wasn't going to intimidate anyone. I was just going to show up and find out how badly my dead husband had lied to me. She was already there when I arrived. Sitting at a table by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had probably gone cold while she waited. She looked older than her license photo. Tired in a way that I recognized because I saw it in my own mirror every morning. She stood up when I walked in, and for a long moment, we just looked at each other. You must be Margaret, she said. You knew my name. He talked about you. I sat down. The chair scraped against the floor. Someone at the next table glanced over, then went back to their laptop. Normal day. Normal coffee shop. Just 2 women meeting for the first time under circumstances that were anything but normal. I brought your wallet. I put it on the table between us. She looked at it but didn't pick it up. I thought I'd lost it months ago. Before, she stopped. I didn't realize it was in his car. There's a photo inside. I know. I need you to explain it. She took a breath. The kind of breath you take before you say something that's going to change the shape of a conversation. Her hands were still around the teacup, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. Nerves, maybe. Or something else. How much did David tell you about his childhood? She asked. It wasn't the question I was expecting. I'd been bracing for confessions, apologies, the whole sordid explanation of how long it had been going on and whether he ever loved me at all. Instead, she was asking about his childhood. I know the basics, I said carefully. He grew up in Wisconsin. His parents died when he was young. He was raised by his aunt and uncle. She nodded slowly. That's what he told everyone. It wasn't true? Parts of it were true. His parents died. But he wasn't raised by his aunt and uncle. Not at first. She picked up her tea, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. David spent 5 years in foster care before his aunt took him in. Did you know that? I didn't. In 22 years of marriage, he'd never mentioned foster care. Not once. He was placed with a family when he was 9, she continued. The Cons. My parents. They fostered him for almost 3 years. I was 7 when he came to live with us. For 3 years, he was my brother. The noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade. I was aware of my own heartbeat, the weight of my hands on the table, the way the light was falling through the window, but none of it felt quite real anymore. Your brother, I repeated. Not by blood. By circumstance. By 3 years of sharing a house and eating breakfast together and fighting over the TV remote like siblings do. By the time I was 10, I couldn't remember what it was like before he was there. And then, she stopped again. Something shifted in her face. A kind of tightening around the eyes that happens when you're trying not to cry. Then he was gone. My parents couldn't afford to keep fostering. My dad lost his job. They had to give him up. He went to live with his aunt in Madison, and I never saw him again. I was 10 years old, and my brother just disappeared. I tried to match what she was saying with the man I knew. The man who never talked about his childhood except in the vaguest terms. The man who changed the subject whenever I asked about his early years. The man who had nightmares sometimes and never wanted to explain what they were about. I didn't know any of this, I said. He didn't want you to. He didn't want anyone to know. When he aged out of the system and went to college, he decided to leave all of it behind. The foster homes, the instability, the feeling of being passed around like an inconvenience. He just closed the door on it, built a new life, became someone else. But he found you again. No. She shook her head. I found him 4 years ago. I'd been looking for him on and off for decades, following leads that went nowhere, trying different versions of his name. And then I found an article about his company in some trade magazine, and there he was. Same face. Older, but I knew him immediately. I sent him a letter to his office. I didn't know if he'd respond. He did. He called me the next day. He was, I don't know how to describe it. Scared, maybe. Like I'd uncovered something he thought was buried forever. But also relieved. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone had finally offered to help him hold it. She reached for her wallet then, the one I'd brought. Opened it. Took out the photograph and laid it on the table. That was 2 summers ago. We went to the lake. Michigan City. He wanted to show me the place where he used to go with his aunt before she got sick. We spent the whole day walking on the beach and talking about things we'd never talked about with anyone else. About what it was like. Being kids in that house together. Losing each other. Finding each other again. I stared at the photograph. At the way he was smiling. At the way she was leaning into him. And I saw it differently now. Not the lean of a lover. The lean of a sister. Of someone who's found a piece of themselves they thought was lost forever. He didn't tell me, I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. In 4 years, he never told me any of this. He wanted to. Many times. But he'd built his whole identity around being someone who came from a stable home, had a normal childhood, wasn't damaged by the system. He was ashamed. Not of me, not of what we had. But of the fact that he'd lied for so long. The longer it went on, the harder it got to find the right moment. So instead he just had this whole other relationship I knew nothing about. I wouldn't call it a relationship. We saw each other maybe 4 or 5 times a year. Had lunch. Talked on the phone sometimes. He helped me when I got divorced, not financially, just. He was there. He listened. For the first time in my life, I had someone who understood where I came from. Who I was before everything else. And he never mentioned me. He mentioned you constantly. She said it quietly, but with a kind of weight that made me look up. Every conversation, Margaret this, Margaret that. The trip you took to Portugal. The way you laugh at your own jokes before you finish telling them. The fact that you eat your dessert first when you go to restaurants because you say life's too short to wait for the good stuff. He loved you. He adored you. He just didn't know how to let you into this part of his life without destroying the version of himself you'd married. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that he should have trusted me, that I would have understood, that he had no right to keep something this big from me for so long. But the words stuck in my throat because I was thinking about all the times I'd asked about his childhood and he deflected. All the times I'd noticed the shadow that crossed his face when someone mentioned their own family memories. All the times I'd told myself it was just how he was, not a sign of something deeper. The fishing trips, I said. Those weekends he said he was going with his brother. Some of them were with me. We'd drive up to Wisconsin sometimes. Visit the places we used to know. Just reconnect. She paused. I know how it must have looked when you found that wallet. I know what you must have thought. And I'm sorry. Not for existing. Not for wanting my brother back. But for being part of something that hurt you. Even though that was never what either of us wanted. I sat there for a long time. The coffee I'd ordered went cold. People came and went around us, living their normal lives while mine continued to rearrange itself into shapes I didn't recognize. He had a sister, I finally said. For 22 years, my husband had a sister, and I never knew. He had a lot of things he never told anyone. The nightmares. The way he flinched sometimes when people raised their voices. The reason he was so obsessive about keeping the house clean and organized. Did you ever notice that? I had. I'd always thought it was just a personality quirk. A little bit of OCD that made him useful when it came to keeping the kitchen cabinets organized. It had never occurred to me that it might be something else. A holdover from years of not having a space of his own. A way of controlling the only environment he could. There was a home, she said. Before my parents. A family that wasn't kind to him. He never told me the details. But I remember how he was when he first came to live with us. The way he'd hide food in his room. The way he'd apologize constantly for things that weren't his fault. It took almost a year before he stopped flinching when my father walked into a room. And then, just when he was finally starting to feel safe. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I thought about David. My David. The man who always volunteered to mentor young engineers at his company. The man who donated quietly to children's charities and never wanted anyone to know. The man who could never watch movies about orphans or foster kids without finding an excuse to leave the room. I don't know what to do with this, I said. You don't have to do anything. I just wanted you to know who he really was. All of him, Not just the parts he thought were safe to show. We sat there for another hour. She told me stories about their 3 years together. The way he used to read to her at night because she was scared of the dark. The time they built a fort in the backyard and pretended they were explorers discovering a new world. The fight they had over a broken toy that led to their first real sibling reconciliation, complete with tearful apologies and a pinky promise to never stay mad at each other for more than a day. Little things. The kind of things that don't seem important until you realize they're the building blocks of a person. The foundation of who someone becomes. When we finally left, standing on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, she handed me something. A small envelope. He wrote this, she said, last year, when he was thinking about finally telling you. He never sent it, but he asked me to keep it. In case something happened. In case you ever needed to understand. I took the envelope. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. That familiar slant that I'd seen on anniversary cards and grocery lists, and the note he left me every morning before he went to work, even after 20 years. I'm sorry I never got to know you, she said. Under different circumstances, I think we could have been friends. Maybe we still can be. She smiled. A small, tired smile. Maybe. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I didn't open it until I was sitting in the kitchen, in the same chair where I'd sat 3 nights ago, staring at the wallet that had upended everything I thought I knew. The letter was 3 pages. His handwriting got messier as it went on, the way it always did when he was working through something difficult. He'd started writing it and stopped multiple times. You could see where the ink changed color, where days or weeks must have passed between paragraphs. He started by apologizing. Not just for the secret, but for all the times he'd almost told me and hadn't. For the cowardice that kept him quiet. For the fear that I would see him differently if I knew the truth about where he came from. Then he told me everything. The mother who left when he was 6. The father who drank and raged and eventually died in a car accident he caused himself. The first foster home where the family only wanted the government check. The second foster home that was worse. The Khans, who were the first people to ever treat him like a child instead of a burden. Losing them. Being sent to his aunt, who did her best but was elderly and sick and couldn't quite understand the trauma he was carrying. Spending his teenage years feeling like he was standing on unstable ground, waiting for the next loss, the next abandonment. And then college. Where he decided to become someone else. Where he met me. I fell in love with you the night we shared that study table, he wrote. Not because you were beautiful, though you were. Because you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. Like I had value. And I was so terrified of losing that look that I built an entire life around protecting it. I should have trusted you. I know that now. I should have trusted that you would love me anyway, even the broken parts, even the shameful history. But by the time I understood that, the lie had grown so big that I didn't know how to dig my way out of it. If you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. It means I never found the courage. And for that, I'm sorrier than I can ever say. Rebecca is good. She's the only family I have left from that time. Please don't hate her. She wanted me to tell you from the beginning. She said you deserve to know. She was right. She was always right. I love you, Maggie. I loved you from the beginning. I will love you until whatever comes after this. And I hope that somewhere beyond all my failures and all my secrets, that love is enough. David. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down and stared at the kitchen wall for a long time. The house was quiet around me. The same house we'd spent 15 years fixing up. The same walls that held 22 years of memories. The same floors where we danced in the kitchen one New Year's Eve, just the 2 of us, no music, just swaying back and forth and laughing at how ridiculous we were. I'd spent 2 months grieving a man I thought I knew. And now I was grieving him again, but differently this time. Not the man I'd married. The boy he'd been before. The child who'd been passed around and abandoned and never felt safe. Who'd grown into a man so desperate to be seen as normal, as whole, as worthy of love, that he'd buried half his life just to feel like he deserved the other half. I called Rebecca that night. I read it, I said. The letter. She was quiet for a moment, and? I wish he'd told me. I wish he'd trusted me. But I understand why he didn't. And I don't blame him. I can't. He was a good man. He was complicated. But yeah. He was good. We talked for 2 hours. About him. About her. About the strange way life works, bringing people together and tearing them apart, and then sometimes, if you're lucky, bringing them back together again when it's almost too late. She told me about the funeral. How she'd wanted to come but didn't know if she'd be welcome. How she'd driven to the church and sat in the parking lot for an hour, then drove away again. How she'd watched the obituary online and cried for 3 days. I told her about the last morning I saw him. How he'd burned the toast, as usual, and I'd complained, as usual. And he'd kissed me on the forehead and said he'd see me tonight. How that was it. That was the last thing. See you tonight. He was on his way to see me that day, she said, very quietly. We were supposed to have lunch. He'd finally decided to tell you. That weekend. He was going to ask me how to start the conversation. The weight of that settled over me like something physical. All those months of secrets, finally about to end. And then an aneurysm in a conference room and none of it mattered anymore. I'm glad he found you, I said. I'm glad he had that, at least. Those 4 years. Someone who knew him. Really knew him. He wanted you to know him too. More than anything. I know. I think I did. In the ways that counted. I just didn't have all the context. The months that followed were strange. I kept cleaning out the house, but slower now. With more attention. I found things I hadn't noticed before. A children's book tucked in the back of his closet, one Rebecca said was his favorite when they were kids. A small box of photographs from his foster years that he'd never shown me but had clearly looked at often, the edges worn soft from handling. Notes in his handwriting about childhood memories, fragments of the past he was trying to piece together. I boxed up some of it. Gave some of it to Rebecca. Kept some of it for myself. We started meeting regularly. Once a month at first, then more often. It was awkward at first. 2 women who shared a connection to the same man, trying to figure out how to exist in each other's lives. But slowly, it got easier. We'd have dinner. She'd tell me stories about the childhood they'd shared. I'd tell her stories about the man he became. And somewhere in the overlap, a fuller picture started to emerge. The dealership never came for the car. I canceled the pickup. Decided to keep it instead. Sometimes I just sit in the driver's seat and close my eyes and remember what it was like to have him sitting beside me. Sometimes Rebecca came with me, and we'd drive up to Wisconsin, to the places they used to go, and she'd point out landmarks and tell me things he'd never told me himself. I found the frozen yogurt place. The one on her punch card. It was a little shop in Oak Park, family-owned, the kind of place that's been there forever. I went inside and bought a cup and sat at a small table by the window and thought about the 2 of them meeting here, eating frozen yogurt and catching up on decades of lost time. The owner recognized me. Not by face, but by the card. You're the sister's friend, he said. The one who used to come with the tall guy. I'm his wife, actually. Wife? He looked confused. I thought, they said they were brother and sister. I didn't know he was married. Neither did I said, and it took me a moment to realize that wasn't quite true anymore. I mean, I didn't know about her. Until recently. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they can tell there's a longer story but are polite enough not to ask. He was a good tipper, he said finally. Always paid for both of them. Always said he was making up for lost time. Making up for lost time. That's what he was doing all along. While I thought he was fishing with his brother or catching up on work, he was sitting in a frozen yogurt shop in Oak Park, eating rainbow sprinkles with the sister he'd lost when he was 12 years old, trying to fill in the gaps of a childhood that had been stolen from both of them. I couldn't be angry about that. I tried. In the early days, when the shock was still fresh, I tried to summon the righteous fury of a betrayed wife. But it kept slipping away from me, replaced by something softer and sadder. Grief, maybe. Or just understanding. He'd lied to me. That was true. But he'd lied to me because he was ashamed. Because he thought I couldn't love the person he'd been before he became the person I married. And that was a failure of his imagination, not his character. He underestimated me. He didn't know how much I could have held if he'd just let me try. But then, maybe I underestimated him too. Maybe I never pushed hard enough to really see him. Maybe I accepted the surface because the surface was comfortable, and I didn't want to do the work of going deeper. We both failed each other, in our own ways. And we both loved each other, in our own ways. And maybe that's just what marriage is, in the end. 2 people failing and loving at the same time, trying to build something real out of imperfect materials. I sold the house last spring. It was too big for one person, and the memories were starting to feel more like weight than comfort. I moved to a smaller place in the city, closer to work, with a view of the lake if you stand on your toes and lean out the window. Rebecca came to help me pack. We spent an entire weekend sorting through boxes, deciding what to keep and what to let go. There were tears. There was also laughter, at the absurdity of some of his collections, old magazines he'd never read, broken electronics he swore he'd fix someday, a drawer full of keys that didn't seem to go to anything. At the end of it, when the house was empty and the movers had taken everything away, we stood in the driveway and looked at the place where I'd spent 22 years of my life. He loved this house, Rebecca said. He did. But he loved you more. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and watched the sun go down behind the roof, and thought about all the things we tell ourselves about love. How it's supposed to be simple, transparent, unconditional. How we're supposed to know everything about the people we share our lives with. How secrets are betrayals and betrayals are unforgivable. None of that is true. Not really. Love is messy and complicated and full of hidden rooms that people are afraid to open. The question isn't whether someone kept secrets. The question is what you do when you finally find them. I got in my car and drove to the new apartment. Rebecca followed in hers. We had dinner together that night, takeout on boxes that still needed unpacking, and we talked about David. About who he was and who he wished he could have been. About the life he built on a foundation of silence and the cracks that never quite showed until after he was gone. I keep the letter in my nightstand. I read it sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and I can almost hear his voice in the words. I don't know if I've forgiven him. I don't know if forgiveness is even the right frame. He's not here to ask for it. He's not here to explain. All I have is what he left behind, the love, the secrets, the complicated truth of who he really was. Rebecca and I still see each other. Not as often now, but regularly. We're something like family, I suppose. Not by blood. Not by marriage. By circumstance. By 3 pages of his handwriting in a wallet found under a car seat and the strange, winding path that brought us both to a man who couldn't tell us everything but told us what he could. Last month, I finally finished the punch card. Went to the frozen yogurt place by myself. Got the free cup I'd earned. Sat at the table by the window and watched the people walk by outside, living their lives, carrying their own secrets, loving each other imperfectly the way everyone does. The owner recognized me again. Nodded in my direction. Didn't say anything. I sat there for a long time, eating frozen yogurt I didn't really want, thinking about David. About all the years we had. About all the years we didn't get. About the photograph of him and Rebecca, smiling at the camera, standing on a boardwalk somewhere with the water behind them and the sun in their eyes. He looked happy in that photo. Really happy. The kind of happy that comes from finding something you thought was lost forever. I think that's what I choose to remember. Not the lies. Not the secrets. Not the hurt of discovering how much I didn't know. But that smile. That real, unguarded smile. The one he wore when he was with the only person who knew him before he became the man I married. He deserved that. After everything he'd been through, he deserved to find her again. He deserved 3 years of frozen yogurt and weekend trips to Wisconsin and phone calls where they could just be brother and sister again, without the weight of everything else. I just wish he'd let me be part of it. But wishing doesn't change anything. He's gone now, and what's left is what's left, and you make peace with it or you don't. You keep going or you don't. You let the anger eat you or you let it go. I'm letting it go, slowly. Piece by piece. Day by day. The wallet is in my nightstand too, next to the letter. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it's the thing that started all of this. The small, ordinary object that cracked open a life I thought I understood and showed me everything underneath. Or maybe I kept it because it belonged to her. To Rebecca. To my husband's sister. To the woman who knew him first and loved him longest and never stopped looking for him even when everyone else had given up. She's my family now. The only connection I have left to him that isn't just memory. And some nights, when I'm lying in bed and the city sounds drift up from the street below, I think about what he wrote in that letter. About how he fell in love with me because I looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. I still would, David. If you were here. If you could see me now. I would look at you the same way. Even knowing everything. Even knowing all of it. That's what I'd tell him, if I could. That's what I'd want him to understand. He was always worth knowing. All of him. Even the parts he was afraid to show.